Welcome back to her Fireside Stories, your cozy corner for the most captivating tales about family, betrayal, and redemption. Today's story is going to shock you to your core. Imagine raising your grandson for years, only to overhear your own son casually telling the neighbor, "You're just the maid." But what happens next is absolutely brilliant. Our heroine turns the tables by handing her son a meticulously crafted contract that leaves him completely speechless. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to discover exactly how she teaches her family a lesson they'll never forget. If you enjoy stories where justice and dignity prevail, make sure to subscribe to our channel right now. Your support helps us bring you even more incredible stories. And don't forget, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below what you would have done in her place and let us know where you're tuning in from today. Now, grab a cup of tea, sit back, and let's dive right in. Wait, did you just say I'm the maid? I roared, gripping the edge of the rickety porch railing so hard I thought it might snap. The neighbor, some fresh-faced man who lived across the hall, stammered as he tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. My own son, Adrian, had told him, with all the confidence in the world, that I was merely the housekeeper hired to run errands, clean the dishes, and mop the floors. In that moment, I felt years of exhaustion, heartbreak, and downright fury surging through my veins, as unstoppable as a flash flood. I had sacrificed everything, my career plans, my savings, even the small but cherished apartment I once owned, and now I discovered that, in Adrian's circle, I was just a nameless worker. It was beyond insulting. It ignited an inferno in my chest, burning away the last traces of self-doubt I'd been clinging to for so long. No more. If the world was going to see me as a maid, then I would craft a contract to show them exactly what that job entailed, and they'd pay the price for my time and labor, literally. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the day my grandson Oscar was first placed in my arms. Back then, Adrian and his wife Colette seemed so grateful for my presence, so happy that I was willing to dedicate my life to raising their child while they juggled careers and social events. For 7 full years, I bathed Oscar, sang him lullabies, nursed him through fevers, taught him his ABCs, everything. I was a grandmother, yes, but I was effectively a full-time live-in nanny, a cook, a cleaning lady, and a volunteer banker. I bore it all because love, they say, is unconditional. But unconditional does not mean you have to accept being belittled. Nothing tests your patience quite like living under the same roof as 2 adults who come to see you as a convenience rather than family. They wanted me to wake early, handle Oscar's lunches, get him to and from summer camp, tidy the house, run errands, do groceries, and wash all their clothes. At night, I collapsed into a tiny guest room bed, my back howling from the day's labor. I never asked for praise, just a bit of respect. Are you as shocked as I was in that moment? Let me know. Comment 1 if you can't believe Adrian's audacity, or 2 if you think there's more to the story. At first, I told myself it was just a rough patch. Colette and Adrian were busy, and new parents can be overwhelmed. I rationalized every slight, every neglectful moment, telling myself that tomorrow would be better. I pushed aside my own desires, like the dream of finally attending a local gardening class or traveling with my sister Greta to see the mountains up north. None of that seemed as urgent as giving Oscar the love and support he needed in his formative years. Each time Adrian or Colette forgot to say thank you, I shrugged it off. "They're tired," I would whisper to myself. Or, "They'll appreciate me once Oscar's older." But the years passed, and instead of getting easier, it seemed to get worse. Colette was the first to treat me like staff, telling me how to rinse vegetables and criticizing the way I folded laundry. Sometimes she would hold up a freshly folded shirt, scrutinize it like an inspector at a high security facility, and then meticulously redo every crease. Oscar has sensitive skin, she would say with the air of someone speaking to a clueless subordinate. You need to use a milder detergent. Meanwhile, Adrian would sit in the living room, his eyes locked on a smartphone, occasionally glancing in my direction with something like guilt, but never stepping in. The day I realized they wanted me gone was the day they said, "We need our own space." Now, the words themselves might not seem harsh, but the look in Colette's eyes told me everything. I wasn't family in her mind, not in the sense that mattered. I was more like an au pair whose contract was up, an extra piece of furniture crowding their sleek new decor. Adrian said nothing to defend me. He just nodded weakly in agreement, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world that his mother should quietly pack her bags. I sold my city apartment, my last real asset, to go live with my sister Greta in the countryside. I told myself this would be my time to finally relax. But wouldn't you know it, I hadn't even fully unpacked before the phone rang. Adrian on the other line. "Mom, we really need you. Oscar's missing you so much. Also, there's a summer camp he wants to attend. It's only $5,000. Before we continue, where are you reading from? Comment your city or country. I'm curious to know. $5,000. Just like that, the entire reason for their call was clear as day. Of course, Oscar missed me. Any child would miss a grandparent who showered them with attention. But the second request, that only $5,000, spoke volumes. In their eyes, my worth was tied to my willingness to bankroll their desires. They assumed I had sold my apartment so I could funnel that money straight into their daily lives, as if my entire existence revolved around bailing them out. Anger flared like a forest fire, fast and all-consuming. I felt that old ache in my bones, the echo of the times I'd gotten up at 3 in the morning to cradle Oscar through his coughing fits, the sting of days spent kneeling on the kitchen floor, scrubbing so Colette wouldn't fuss. I couldn't just tell Adrian no, not in that moment. I needed to think. So, with a calm I didn't truly feel, I said, "Let me consider it," and hung up. Greta was sitting at the kitchen table when I turned around. Her weathered hands, rough from years of farm work, were folded under her chin. She arched one eyebrow, speaking volumes without saying a word. "I know," I told her, sinking into a chair. "They're after money," she snorted. "Marina, I hope you're done letting them trample all over you." That was the spark I needed. I wasn't a bank, nor was I an on-call servant. If they wanted my help so badly, they'd have to meet me on equal ground. So I hatched a plan. First, I decided to quietly sell my old apartment, which I had initially intended to rent out or keep for nostalgia. Second, I locked away the majority of the proceeds in long-term investments, far from Adrian and Colette's grasp. Third, I booked a bus ticket back to the city, determined to re-enter their lives with a backbone made of steel and a heart that wouldn't be so easily bruised. What I didn't expect was to find out that my grandson, the same child I had held in my arms for 7 straight years, had been telling the neighbor I was just their maid. That casual dismissal of my role stung like 1,000 needles. If you've ever felt unappreciated by someone close to you, drop a 1 in the comments. If you think there's still a chance for them to redeem themselves, drop a 2. I arrived on a humid summer afternoon. My small carry-on suitcase rattled over the cracked pavement as I approached Adrian's condo building. Everything about the place screamed upscale, from the tinted glass doors to the polished marble in the lobby. A far cry from the worn wooden floors of my sister's cozy farmhouse. Colette answered the door, her face arranged into a forced smile that took a split second too long to form. Standing behind her was Adrian, wearing a look that was part relief, part guilt. Though guilt about what exactly, I couldn't be sure. "Mom!" Adrian exclaimed, the faux enthusiasm in his voice betraying his nerves. "You must be tired. Come on in." Oscar peeked from around a corner, eyes brightening momentarily when he recognized me. Yet I sensed a hesitation, as though Colette or Adrian had cautioned him not to get too attached. And why wouldn't they? The entire premise of my visit was, yet again, more about convenience for them than any true desire to reunite mother and child. They pointed to the couch, which was already dressed with a set of folded sheets and a pillow. The silent message, "This is your place." Swallowing my indignation, I sat down and forced a polite nod. "Thank you for setting this up," I managed. What I wanted to say was, "You're really making me sleep in the living room again?" But it wasn't the time for that fight. Not yet, because my plan required me to study their behavior, to let them show exactly how they perceived me, and then, only then, reveal my terms. During the first day, Colette and Adrian acted like gracious hosts. She offered me tea. He asked if I needed anything. But the facade cracked before sunset, when Colette casually mentioned, "By the way, since you're here, we're a bit short on groceries. Could you pick up some things tomorrow morning? Here's a list." It wasn't a request. It was an order, softly veiled. I simply nodded, memorizing the details of every unspoken demand: laundry, vacuuming, babysitting Oscar so they could attend late-night events, cooking dinner to spare them the expense of takeout. The same old pattern threatened to swallow me, but I refused to let it. Quick check-in: how's the story so far? Riveting or too familiar? Comment, "I'm hooked," if you're loving it, or "seen this before," if it sounds like your in-laws. The very next morning, I rose early to fulfill their grocery request, solely for the purpose of gathering information on their expectations. Oscar padded into the living room while I was slipping on my shoes. He held a comic book in his hand, wearing pajamas printed with cartoon robots. "Grandma, can I come with you?" he asked, eyes hopeful. I hesitated, remembering the countless times I'd taken him shopping in the past, how we'd turned the cereal aisle into a mini adventure. But this time, I wanted to see if Colette or Adrian would object. "No, Oscar," Colette said instantly, appearing behind him in her sleek housecoat. "You stay here and finish your breakfast. Let Grandma do what she needs to do." My chest tightened. It was as if she was telling him not to get too attached, not to treat me like a loving grandmother who might eventually leave. It wasn't so much about my comfort or Oscar's well-being. It was about convenience, her convenience. So I left without Oscar. I returned an hour later, armed with 2 grocery bags. Colette barely greeted me, just flicked a glance at the clock. "Oh, good," she said. "We needed eggs for breakfast. Could you whip something up for Oscar?" The line was so typical, so galling, it almost made me laugh. I, who had just trudged half a mile in the sweltering heat, was now expected to jump into kitchen duty, no questions asked. Once again, I nodded, silently adding that to my mental ledger. After breakfast, Colette asked me to handle the dishes. Adrian chimed in with a request to dust the living room shelves because Oscar's allergies are acting up. Nothing was said about payment, boundaries, or gratitude. I was back to square one, right? Not exactly, because now I knew better. I let them assign tasks, noticing how their list grew longer the more I silently complied. At dinner, they casually mentioned the $5,000 summer robotics camp. "We'd send Oscar, but money is tight," Adrian said, sliding the conversation in my direction as though it were a baton in a relay race I was duty-bound to finish. My reply was a simple, "It does sound expensive," followed by a shrug. I left it at that, letting tension build as they recognized I wasn't leaping at the chance to fund their dream. That evening, I sat on the couch while Oscar played with building blocks on the floor. Every few moments, he'd glance at me with a sort of uncertain admiration. He knew deep down I'd once been the person who had all the answers, who always had time to wipe away tears or bandage scraped knees. Now, he was probably sensing that things had changed. I felt a twinge of sadness. None of this was his fault. He was only a child. But I also knew the moment I caved to pity, Colette and Adrian would take advantage of my grandmotherly love. Just then, the door buzzer sounded. Adrian walked over to answer it. Through the crack, I heard an unfamiliar voice belonging to their neighbor, a middle-aged man in a button-down shirt. He was holding a package and said, a little too brightly, "Oh, hey, Oscar told me your maid lives with you." The next few seconds were a blur as Adrian muttered an awkward correction, but the neighbor insisted Oscar had specifically said, "The lady who cleans." I nearly choked. My ears rang. That's when it all clicked. Oscar had repeated what he'd been hearing from his parents. Perhaps Colette had told him, "Don't bother your grandma. She's just here to clean." Or Adrian might have dismissed me as help. However it was said, it had stuck in the child's mind. The neighbor's reference cut deeper than any single request for babysitting or money ever had. I rose from the couch and walked over, forcing a calmness I didn't feel. The neighbor, realizing I'd overheard, tried to stutter some apology, but I merely brushed it aside. My mind was already racing ahead. Let them think I'm the maid. A maid is an employee, after all, and employees get paid and have contracts. I retreated to my small guest room, essentially a converted storage space with a twin bed, and sat down at a makeshift desk. Using my phone, I began typing up a formal work agreement. If they wanted me around that badly, they could commit to it in writing. No more under-the-table demands, no more guilt-laden pleas. If I was truly just the maid, then by all means, I'd show them the price of my labor. Curious if you'd ever draft a contract with your own family. Type yes if you think it's fair, no if it feels too extreme. Early the next morning, I printed out a neat copy of that contract at a corner print shop. It contained bullet points, exact hours for babysitting, a strict list of tasks I would or wouldn't do, and a monthly fee. It also included a no-tolerance clause for disrespect, any personal insults or demeaning behavior, and I'd walk out without notice or refund. The woman at the print shop, glancing over my shoulder, remarked, "That's some serious documentation," giving me a half smile that suggested she'd seen far stranger things in this city. I told neither Adrian nor Colette about the contract right away. Instead, I observed them for another day. Sure enough, the pattern was the same. Morning errands, midday chores, followed by a casual hint or two about the money for Oscar's camp. My role in their eyes was to facilitate their lifestyle. The next morning, I rose bright and early, set out a modest breakfast for Oscar, then waited until both Colette and Adrian had settled at the dining table. "Good morning, all," I said, sliding the papers across the table. Colette looked up from her phone, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Adrian set down his coffee, brows knitting together. "What's this?" he asked. "Oh, just a work agreement," I answered, my tone light and cheerful. "You know, since Oscar told the neighbor I'm basically the maid, I figured we should make it official." Colette's face turned a peculiar shade of pale. She scanned the first page, the corners of her mouth quivering with shock. Adrian picked up the second page, reading the bullet points out loud in a stunned voice. "Hourly rate for babysitting. Laundry is extra. House cleaning is extra. Cooking is extra." The color drained from his cheeks. "Yes," I said sweetly. "If you'd like me to do laundry, the cost is there. Cooking, likewise. Babysitting fees are daily, but we can adjust if you'd prefer a weekly bundle. Of course, if you choose not to sign, I'm happy to pack my things and head back to Greta's place. But if I'm just the maid, then I intend to be treated like one, a professional who deserves proper pay and conditions." Oscar sat there, wide-eyed, evidently picking up on the sudden tension. Colette's gaze darted from me to Adrian and back again, shock rapidly morphing into indignation. "You're kidding, right?" Colette said, her voice trembling somewhere between outrage and disbelief. "This is absolutely ridiculous. We're family." I calmly folded my arms. "Are we? Because family wouldn't demean me in front of neighbors or turn me into their personal on call servant. The way you've treated me these past few weeks suggests otherwise. I pointed to the contract. I didn't say I'm refusing to help. I'm just refusing to be taken advantage of. So, if you truly see me as an employee, sign the dotted line and let's call it what it is. Adrian placed a hand on Colette's shoulder as if trying to calm her, then looked at me, wincing slightly. Mom, we never meant to make you feel like. That's exactly what you did. I cut in, my eyes burning with the memory of being told to pack up and leave, of discovering I'd been labeled the help by my own grandson. I'm not entertaining guilt trips anymore. If you want to consider me part of the household, you treat me as such, with the respect any adult deserves. If you want to treat me like hired help, then you'll pay me accordingly. Either way, I'll survive. A thick silence settled over the table. Outside, the city rumbled with morning traffic, horns blaring, and a faint breeze wafted through the open window. I remained still, bracing myself for the backlash. Colette finally muttered something under her breath, then flipped through the pages of the agreement. Her eyes flicked to Adrian, who seemed on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. "This is insane," she whispered. "Are you actually going to sign it?" Adrian looked torn. He reached up to rub the back of his neck, his posture screaming discomfort. "Oscar needs someone around. We can't just send him to day camp. It's too expensive." The mention of expense triggered something in me. "Too expensive?" I repeated softly. "You mean like that $5,000 robotics camp you wanted me to pay for? If everything is so expensive, perhaps you should manage your budget better. After all, you're both working adults." Oscar, sensing the tension, quietly slipped off his chair and wandered into the living room, hugging his stuffed robot close. The poor kid. None of this was his doing, but he was caught in the crossfire nonetheless. Pause. Are you rooting for me to stand my ground, or do you think I'm pushing them too far? Leave a stand strong or go easy in the comments. Colette eventually stormed off, leaving the contract on the table. Adrian sat there, staring at it as though it were a venomous snake poised to strike. I said nothing more, simply collected my keys and left the apartment to walk around the block. I didn't go far, I just needed air. The city's towering buildings pressed down from every angle, a far cry from the open fields back at Greta's. But even amid the concrete, I felt more alive than I had in years. I was done being silent, done living on scraps of approval. By the time I returned, Adrian was alone in the living room, flipping through channels on mute. The contract lay open on the coffee table, a pen resting on top. It was clear he'd read it through, perhaps multiple times. I stood by the door, arms crossed, waiting. After a tense few seconds, he cleared his throat. "You'll really leave if we don't sign?" I nodded. "I have my bus ticket. I can be out of here in under an hour." He let out a long, shaky exhale. "Mom, I'm sorry for how we made you feel, but Colette and we're just stressed. Work deadlines, Oscar's school, everything. We didn't realize how our actions were." He paused, apparently searching for the right word. "Hurtful?" I offered. "Disrespectful?" Adrian stared at the floor. "Yes." Another pause. "The truth is, we do need your help, and not just for housework. Oscar misses you. He talks about the old days, how you'd read to him at night, how you'd patch up his scrapes with funny cartoon bandages. We need that love. We just didn't handle it right." For a moment, I almost felt my heart soften, but then I recalled the neighbor's words. "Oh, hey, you're Maid." A wave of cold fury slid through me again. "I'm glad you see where I'm coming from," I said quietly. "But words aren't enough anymore, Adrian. Actions matter." I nudged the contract pointedly with my fingertip. "If you mean what you say, sign it. If not, I'll be gone by dinner." He swallowed, picked up the pen, and with trembling fingers, scribbled his signature on the last page. Surprisingly, Colette signed too, though she did so the next morning, eyes red from what looked like a night of crying or raging. I couldn't tell which. She avoided meeting my gaze, but her name, scrawled in neat script, was proof enough that she was at least willing to comply. Thus began my official tenure as the maid, documented and legally recognized. But if they thought this contract would mean business as usual, they had another thing coming. On the very first day under our new arrangement, I woke up, went straight to the kitchen, and prepared breakfast for Oscar only. That's right, the contract clearly stated I was responsible for tasks directly related to childcare from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Nowhere did it say I had to feed two grown adults. So I left the fridge stocked with eggs, bacon, and bread for them to make their own meals. Colette stumbled in, bleary-eyed, sniffing for coffee, and found me plating a single child's portion of scrambled eggs for Oscar. "What about ours?" she asked, voice thick with morning grumpiness. I tapped the contract pinned to the fridge. "My job is child-oriented tasks. You and Adrian are free to make your own, or hire someone else to do it." I offered a polite smile, then handed Oscar his fork. She stared at me like I had spontaneously sprouted horns. "But you always used to cook for us." "Yes," I replied, shrugging. "That was before you made it abundantly clear I'm here for Oscar's sake, nothing more. I'm just following my job description, Colette." Her mouth opened, then closed. No words came out, so she spun on her heel and stormed off to presumably alert Adrian. Yet, I heard no argument from him. Perhaps he remembered the conversation we'd had. After all, it was official now. I wasn't obligated to serve them. Of course, they could try to break the contract, but that would end my childcare services altogether, leaving them scrambling for a nanny or daycare. Oscar, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the silent war raging around him. He happily munched his breakfast, then looked up with a smile. "Grandma, can you help me with my dinosaur puzzle after I'm done?" I ruffled his hair. "Of course, sweetheart. That's in the contract, too. If you love seeing them get a taste of their own medicine, type karma. If you think it's too harsh, comment too far." The first week was an eye-opener for Adrian and Colette. They learned just how thoroughly I had organized my boundaries. For laundry, I provided a separate hamper for Oscar's clothes, stating I'd handle only those. Dirty dishes? I washed only the plates and utensils Oscar used. House cleaning? I vacuumed only in Oscar's room, claiming it was part of maintaining a dust-free environment for his comfort. Every time Colette or Adrian tried to rope me into something beyond the scope of the contract, I'd smile sweetly and say, "Oh, that's not in my job description." This new arrangement forced them to face the reality of household chores. Colette had to do the laundry for herself and Adrian. Adrian started making quick morning meals or picking up ready-made sandwiches from the corner store. The first couple of days, they fumed in silence. Then they tried guilt-tripping me. Adrian approached one afternoon with a forced grin. "Mom, you don't mind doing the living room floor, right? You've always been so good at getting those stains out." I flipped to the cleaning duties section of the contract. "Sorry, Adrian, that's not within my hours. But if you'd like, I can work overtime at my standard rate." I tapped the line item that stated my hourly wage for additional tasks. His face fell. Colette tried tears, cornering me in the hallway. "Doesn't it hurt your heart to see your son come home to a messy living room after a hard day's work?" I might have softened at that once, but not now. Ask him if it hurt his heart when he made me feel unwelcome in this very home. My compassion is for Oscar. You two are grown-ups. She looked outraged but said nothing further. I knew then that she was truly grappling with the consequences of her actions. My days became a curious blend of motherly love for Oscar, cooking him lunch, reading him storybooks, taking him to the park, and meticulous self-preservation. I no longer apologized for existing in their space. I no longer walked on eggshells. If that tension was a heavy weight in the apartment, well, it wasn't my burden to lift anymore. If there was one shining light in all this, it was Oscar himself. The boy blossomed under my singular attention. No longer was I too busy cooking or cleaning for his parents to devote myself to him. Instead, we spent afternoons building elaborate block castles, planting herbs in small pots on the balcony, and reviewing his reading assignments. He thrived in that environment, learning that an adult's presence could be wholeheartedly focused on him without any resentment lurking in the background. And ironically, Colette and Adrian discovered an uncomfortable truth. The more I poured my energy into Oscar alone, the more he gravitated toward me instead of them. They'd come home and find us creating hand-drawn comic strips or giggling at the silly voices I made when reading stories. They started to sense that maybe they had been the ones missing out all along. In the past, they simply assumed I'd always be around to pick up the slack. Now, they realized my heart wasn't a free, bottomless well of affection. It came with conditions, conditions they had neglected for far too long. One day, Colette tried to break the ice with an apology. She cornered me while Adrian was at work and Oscar was watching cartoons. "Marina," she began softly, "I realize we pushed you too far. We said things we shouldn't have." I let her talk without interruption. Her voice wavered, and she looked genuinely remorseful. Yet she still never mentioned the neighbor's revelation that I was called the Maid. Perhaps the guilt of that was too raw, or maybe she just wanted to gloss over it. When she finished, I gave a brief nod, acknowledging her words but not offering absolution. My stance remained the same. Real respect would show itself in actions, not in partial apologies meant to restore convenience. By the time that conversation ended, we both knew the lines were drawn. She might try to rebuild a bridge, but the contract remained in effect. My daily tasks limited, my autonomy secure. If she truly wanted me back in the family fold, in spirit, not just in labor, it would take more than a tearful speech to fix what they'd broken. 5 paragraphs left or 5 hours left? Hard to say. Let me know if you're still with me. Still reading. Throughout these weeks, my phone calls with Greta became my lifeline. She'd laugh into the receiver, a hearty, booming sound that lifted my spirits. "Oh, if only I could be a fly on that wall," she'd tease. I'd love to see the look on Colette's face when she has to do her own laundry. Greta encouraged me to stand firm. She reminded me how I'd nearly lost myself under their demands. "You deserve better, Marina," she would say, her voice laced with the unwavering conviction that only a sister can have. "You absolutely deserve better." Her words propelled me forward, but I also sensed that Adrian was struggling. By the third week, he appeared more exhausted than ever. Late nights at work, early mornings sorting out chores, and coming home to the reality that his mother had boundaries now, it was taking a toll. He started confiding in me in small, hesitant doses. "Mom, do you think I messed up with Oscar? He barely comes to me for anything these days." Or, "I really appreciate all you did for him, things I never noticed before." His remorse felt genuine, but I was too bruised by the past to let that melt my defenses entirely. A single apology wasn't enough to erase 7 years of exploitation and the final insult of being labeled the maid. I needed to see sustained changes, both in how they treated me and in how they approached Oscar. The tension in the house reached a boiling point when an unexpected phone call arrived from Oscar's school. He'd been selected for a spot in an advanced summer program, different from the robotics camp. This program cost only a fraction of that $5,000, but it was academically more promising. Oscar came running up to me, eyes gleaming. "Grandma, it's an art and science mix where we get to design and draw our own inventions." He was bouncing on his toes, pure excitement spilling out of him. Colette, however, seemed less thrilled. She pursed her lips when she heard the news. But the robotics camp was going to look good on his college track, she argued. Oscar's face fell slightly. I like drawing more, he whispered. To me, it was obvious. Oscar should pursue the program he was actually excited about, not the one his parents thought would look best on a future resume. I recalled all the times I'd patiently coaxed him into creative projects, how easily he'd light up at the prospect of drawing, painting, or building something whimsical. But Colette remained fixated on that $5,000 robotics camp, as though the price tag alone guaranteed prestige. Listen, Colette, I said, mustering as much diplomacy as I could. Oscar is a bright kid, but forcing him into something he's not excited about might backfire. If the school's offering a spot in a program that aligns more with his interests, that's probably better for him long term. She folded her arms. I suppose you think we're just throwing money around for the sake of status? I gave a non-committal shrug. I didn't say that, but you both did mention the cost more than once. Now that a cheaper, more suitable option has opened up, why not consider it? That night, Colette and Adrian had a tense conversation behind their closed bedroom door. I suspect the contract fiasco and my newfound autonomy had forced them to re-examine their priorities. Adrian approached me around midnight, just as I was reading in the living room, unable to sleep. He sank onto the couch beside me, shoulders slumped. I think we're going for the school's program, he said quietly. It's what Oscar wants. I nodded. I'm glad you see the value in his interests. He hesitated, fiddling with a loose thread on the couch cushion. Mom, he began, voice hoarse. I owe you more than an apology. Colette and I both do. We treated you like a maid, worse sometimes. I never realized how degrading it all was until you came back with that contract. He swallowed. I just didn't know how to fix it. A surge of conflicting emotions washed over me, relief at finally hearing him say it out loud, but also anger that it took such an extreme measure for him to grasp the pain I'd endured. Well, I said softly, now you know. Respect can't be an afterthought. If you want me in your life as your mother, you need to do better. Time for a feedback moment. Press 1 if you think Adrian's being sincere now. 2 if you suspect it's just another ploy. The following week brought a series of small but meaningful changes. Colette started doing little acts of consideration. She brewed an extra pot of coffee in the morning for me, left it by the stove with a small note. Thank you for all you do for Oscar. Adrian stepped up, taking Oscar to the park on weekends without prompting, giving me some free time to browse the local shops or simply relax. They never said it outright, but I could tell they were making an effort to respect the boundaries I'd laid out in the contract. One afternoon, Oscar and I were rummaging through old photographs. He found a picture of the two of us from when he was just a toddler, swaddled in a blanket, cheeks chubby and glistening with drool. I was smiling so widely, you'd think someone had told me I'd won the lottery. Oscar peered at the photo, then at me. Grandma, were you always taking care of me? He asked, eyes wide with innocent curiosity. Yes, I whispered, emotion thick in my throat. From the day you were born until about a year ago, I was with you almost every day. He seemed puzzled. Then why did Mommy say? He caught himself, but I sensed he was recalling the remark about me just being help. My heart clenched. No child should be put in the middle of adult conflicts. It's okay, I told him gently, hugging him close. Sometimes grown-ups say things they don't really mean. Later that evening, while Oscar slept, I rummaged in my suitcase for a small envelope. Inside it was the leftover money Adrian had given me upon my arrival. Some petty cash they'd expected me to use for groceries and errands. I spread it across the table and wrote a note. Expenses for Oscar's daily care deducted as per contract. Remainder returned. I left it where Adrian and Colette would see it. A subtle reminder, if they truly wanted me to be an employee, then I would handle finances like a pro. But if they wanted me as family, they'd need to keep walking the road of respect they'd only just begun. Days stretched into weeks, and I started to sense a genuine transformation unfolding. Colette's sharp edges softened. She no longer demanded or belittled me. She asked politely if I could teach her how to cook certain dishes Oscar adored. Adrian, once so absorbed in his own routines, showed a consistent willingness to pitch in, cleaning floors, washing dishes, sorting laundry for all three of them. Sometimes I'd wake to the soft hum of the vacuum and realize it was him doing the household chores he used to dump in my lap. One evening, Colette quietly approached me while I was folding Oscar's pajamas. I didn't realize how much work goes into managing a household, she admitted, voice trembling with vulnerability. Seeing Adrian pitch in has shown me how unfair it was to push it all onto you. I nodded. It was never about me not wanting to help. It was the lack of appreciation, the assumption I'd do it all forever without a word. She lowered her gaze. You have every right to be angry at us. For the first time, tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't manipulative. They seemed genuine. I used to think, oh, Marina has nothing else going on. She can handle it. But you're a whole person with dreams, feelings, and a life of your own. That acknowledgement was something I never thought I'd hear from Colette. I handed her the last folded pajama top. Thank you for saying that, I replied softly. If you truly want me around, not just as a babysitter, but as family, keep treating me like a human being. That's all I ever wanted. By the time we finished, we'd folded every piece of Oscar's laundry together. A small step, yet it felt monumental. Maybe at last we were stepping into a genuine mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship, free from the baggage of exploitation. The contract still hung on the fridge, of course, an ever-present reminder of boundaries, but it also served as a testament to the fact that we had found a middle ground. They'd either respect me or risk losing me altogether. And from what I could see, they were leaning toward respect. Curious if you think Colette's change of heart is real. Share your thoughts below, skeptic or believer. But just when I thought the household was settling into a new equilibrium, a knock at the door rattled everything. It was that same neighbor who'd once referred to me as the maid. This time, he had come to ask about some condo association matter. The moment he spotted me, a flicker of embarrassment crossed his face. "Oh, hello," he said, holding a clipboard. I just needed a signature from Adrian or Colette. Sorry to bother you." I'd expected to feel a surge of anger or indignation, but oddly enough, I felt only a sense of ironic satisfaction. He had unwittingly sparked the entire chain of events that led to the contract. Part of me wanted to thank him. However, I simply gave him a curt nod and called for Adrian. It was Adrian, not me, who explained, "This is my mother, by the way," with a proud tilt of his head. "She's here helping out with Oscar, and we really appreciate all she does." I noticed Adrian's choice of words. No mention of maid, no implied servitude, just genuine recognition of my role. The neighbor muttered a quick apology from the corner of his mouth. "Nice to meet you properly, Ms. Marina," he said, extending a hand that trembled slightly. I shook it, letting the moment pass. There was no need to rehash old hurts. The real payoff was seeing Adrian assert my status openly. Later that evening, Colette cornered me by the kitchen. "I saw how that neighbor tried to tiptoe around you," she said. "Thanks for not causing a scene." I shrugged. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone. I just want what's fair." She nodded. "We appreciate that more than you know." Then, in a softer voice, "And I wanted to say about that robotics camp. Oscar started art science classes next week, right? I'm sorry I pushed the other things so hard." I realize now it was mostly me trying to keep up appearances, worrying about what other parents would think. A silence fell, but it was comfortable, not tense. Growth, I realized, can happen when people stop caring about the audience and start caring about the child. Maybe Colette, Adrian, and I had taken a rocky, painful path, but if it led us here, where Oscar's interests mattered more than anyone else's pride, then maybe it wasn't a total waste. Soon after that, I got a call from my sister, Greta, who was practically bursting with excitement. She'd been invited to join a local crafts fair in her rural community, selling homemade jams, pies, and knitted goods. "Marina, I'd love for you to come help me," she said. "We could expand the stall, make it a real family enterprise. Maybe we can can some tomatoes, pickle cucumbers, you name it." The invitation tugged at my heart. I'd always dreamed of having a simpler life, where my days began with the chirping of birds instead of car horns, where I could spend my evenings chatting with Greta about everything and nothing. The city's hustle was never really my element, and after the fiasco with Adrian and Colette, the idea of returning to a peaceful countryside seemed even more appealing. I decided to mention it casually at dinner. Greta asked if I might head back soon. She needs help setting up a small farm stand at the fair. I observed their reactions. Adrian exchanged a quick look with Colette. Their eyes were tinged with worry and regret. "But what about Oscar?" Adrian asked, and I noted how he phrased it. Not "what about us," but "what about Oscar?" I gave a faint smile, stirring the pot of stew on the stove. "The contract only states I'd be here until you both felt stable enough to handle things on your own. Seems you're managing fine now, especially with the chores split up." Colette's gaze dropped to her lap. She took a breath, then looked at me with sincerity. "We want you to stay," she confessed. "Not because we need more help, but because it finally feels like we're a real family again. We're sorry for everything that happened, and we don't want to lose this new relationship we're building." My heart fluttered with conflicting emotions. On one hand, I longed for the open spaces at Greta's side, the chance to rediscover my own identity away from the city. On the other, I saw a genuine transformation in Adrian and Colette that I never thought possible. "I'll think about it," I said, offering them a measured nod. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake on the guest bed, memories swirling in my mind. Oscar's first steps, the time I rushed him to the hospital for a nasty fever, the afternoons we spent finger painting and laughing until we cried. Despite all the pain and exploitation, the love was real, especially for Oscar, but love alone couldn't erase years of accumulated hurt. Could I trust Adrian and Colette's apparent shift was permanent? Or would it revert to old patterns if the contract tore, or if I stopped enforcing it? Eventually, I decided it was time to make a choice. At breakfast the next morning, I gathered everyone around the table, Oscar included. "I've been offered a chance to go help your Aunt Greta," I explained, speaking gently so Oscar wouldn't panic. "She has a lot of work, and we might even start a small business together. But I also know you're all trying to do better here. So I need to know sincerely what you want and what you're willing to do to keep me here if I decide to stay." Colette set her fork down, folding her hands in her lap. "Marina," she said softly, "I'm willing to continue with the contract or even sign another one if it means guaranteeing that your role won't be taken for granted." Then she glanced at Adrian, prompting him to speak. He looked me in the eye. "Mom, I'm not going to pretend we magically fixed everything, but I promise we've learned. I won't slip back into letting you handle everything. If anything, I want you to have time for yourself, whether that's visiting Greta often or enrolling in a class, or just taking breaks so you can enjoy life. I don't want you to stay because you feel obligated. I want you to stay because you want to." Oscar, innocence brimming, blurted, "Don't go, Grandma. I'll help you in the garden if you stay. I promise I'll water your plants so you don't get tired." His little face was scrunched in earnestness, the kind that melts the hardest hearts. I let out a long breath. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, I sensed that if I chose to remain, I'd no longer be their doormat. I'd be something else, a respected mother, a cherished grandmother, a person with her own identity. And so I made my decision, one that might surprise some. I stayed, at least for a few more months. Not forever, not out of guilt, and certainly not under the old conditions. I re-signed the contract with updated terms, fewer hours, more personal freedom, and a clause allowing me to visit Greta for extended weekends whenever I pleased. Adrian and Colette accepted these terms without a hint of protest. Oscar practically jumped for joy, hugging me in a whirlwind of gratitude. Slowly but surely, a new routine took shape. Colette learned to cook basic meals, and Adrian tackled the laundry and vacuuming with surprising zeal. Oscar thrived in his art science class, coming home each day bursting with stories of the gadgets he was drawing. Sometimes we'd spend evenings painting together, experimenting with watercolors, or rummaging around secondhand shops for craft materials. It felt more like a genuine family, and less like a burdensome arrangement. The neighbor who once called me the maid had the shock of his life one afternoon when I encountered him in the hallway. He stumbled over an apology, but I simply waved it off with a confident smile. "No worries," I told him. "Sometimes the greatest catalysts for change come from the most unlikely places." That same day, I brought the new official contract by for him to witness. It wasn't out of malice, but more as a statement. I wanted it known that I wasn't a powerless caretaker. When he saw the figures and the terms, his jaw dropped, especially the part about how high my rate climbed if the tasks exceeded my set hours. He stammered something about it being fascinating. I left him to process that piece of information. Eventually, Colette, Adrian, and I sat down for a proper family meal, something we'd rarely done without an undercurrent of tension. There was laughter, there were stories, and for the first time in ages, I felt like an equal. That evening, as I helped Oscar to bed, he held my hand and said, "Grandma, I'm happy you stayed, but I also want you to be happy. If you go see Aunt Greta, I'll write you letters, okay?" My heart swelled. "I'd like that," I said softly, tucking him in with a tender kiss on the forehead. A few weeks later, I took my first extended trip back to Greta's. The bus ride was peaceful, no swirling anxieties about being needed to fold laundry or cook dinner. Adrian even texted me mid-journey. "We've got everything under control, Mom. Enjoy your time off." Strange how a few words can carry so much meaning, how they can affirm that boundaries had finally, truly been set. Upon my arrival at Greta's home, I inhaled the sweet, earthy smell of the countryside, my spirit instantly lighter. "I see you're walking taller," Greta teased, throwing her arms wide in welcome. "City life didn't break you after all." I smiled, recounting the entire saga in detail, from the humiliating revelation that I'd been referred to as the maid, to the drafting of the contract, to Colette's slow metamorphosis from an aloof, demanding daughter-in-law into someone who actually tried to meet me halfway. Greta listened, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief or letting out a triumphant cheer. "I always knew you had it in you," she said. Sometimes, family learns the hard way that unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional servitude. Over the next few days, Greta and I baked pies for the local crafts fair, tested jam recipes, and strolled through her vegetable garden, discussing the possibility of launching a small online store for rural goods. It would be nice to have a project of my own, I mused. Something that's just for me, not for them. Greta's lips curled into a warm smile. "You can do anything, Marina. And now that you have your freedom, well, the sky's the limit." When it was finally time to head back to the city, I felt a pang of mixed emotions. I missed Oscar, but I also loved the peace of this rustic life. For the first time in forever, I realized I had a choice. I was no longer trapped. If life in the city became too stifling, I could leave. If I wanted to help raise Oscar, I could stay. No illusions, no manipulations, just a choice guided by my own heart and mind. Returning to the apartment, I walked in to find Adrian rolling up his sleeves, cleaning the countertops, while Colette and Oscar were at the dining table, painting a school poster. The entire scene felt cozy, genuine, not the sort of performance they'd once staged to impress me when they needed something. Adrian greeted me with a real smile. "Hey, Mom, good to have you back. Everything go well with Greta?" I nodded, setting my bags down. We got a lot done. She's gearing up for the fair. I might go again next month to help her sell our stuff. Oscar looked up from the paint pot. "Will you bring back jam, Grandma? Your strawberry jam is the best." "Of course," I said, my heart warming at his excitement. "I'll bring back a whole crate if you want." After dinner, Colette approached me as I was reading on the couch. "Listen," she began, folding her arms with a hint of nervousness. "I don't want to pry, but is the contract still necessary?" She bit her lip. "We've been doing well, haven't we? Don't you trust us now?" I lowered my book. "Trust is built over time, Colette. We're definitely on a better path. But let's keep the contract for a bit longer, just as a safety net. If we keep going like this for a few more months, we can revisit it." She let out a breath and nodded. "All right, I can understand that." Then her eyes flicked toward Oscar's bedroom. "By the way, you've changed him too. He's more polite, more aware. I don't know how to thank you enough." I smiled wryly. "Colette, believe it or not, I'm not looking for thanks, just respect." With that, she gave a small nod, turned, and went to join Oscar. I shut my book and let my gaze wander around the living room, spotlessly clean, but not by my hands. In the faint reflection of the darkened TV screen, I caught sight of my own face. For years, I'd looked so tired and worn. Now I saw a spark in my eyes, an inner contentment that reminded me of who I was before the burdens of forced caretaking. Finally, the day came when the neighbor who'd once caused such a stir dropped by for a quick hello. He spotted me helping Oscar glue together a makeshift invention from cardboard tubes and bottle caps. Without hesitation, the neighbor said, "Oh, I see you're teaching him some crafty stuff, Ms. Marina." No mention of maids, no patronizing tone. I beamed inwardly, replying, "Yes, just a little something to spark his imagination." Later that night, after Oscar was tucked into bed, Colette and Adrian sat me down in the living room. They exchanged glances, nervous but hopeful. Adrian cleared his throat. "Mom, I know you have your options open, and I respect that. We also know you might want to spend more time in the countryside with Greta. But we wanted to tell you something. We plan to buy a little weekend cabin near that area. We're saving up. It won't be fancy, but it'll be a place where you and Oscar can spend time outdoors together. Maybe you can show him what life outside the city is like." My eyes widened. I hadn't expected such a gesture. Colette chimed in. "We realized we've spent so long chasing what we thought we needed, status, money, a perfect resume for Oscar, that we forgot the simple joys. We forgot that family should mean support, not burden. Buying that cabin is our way of taking a step toward balance." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of cautious hope. I reached out and squeezed both their hands. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more to me than you know." Of course, our story isn't over. Healing from deep hurts is a process, not an event. But we are, at least, on the right path. I have a contract that safeguards my freedom and my dignity. Adrian and Colette are learning to manage household tasks without defaulting to me. Oscar is thriving in a program he loves, guided by the passions that truly spark his curiosity. And every so often, I head to Greta's place for a taste of rural life. No guilt, no baggage, just the open sky and the knowledge that I am free to make my own choices. And that, dear listener, is how my son once told a neighbor I was only the maid, and how I turned it into the ultimate lesson on respect and boundaries by handing him a contract that changed all our lives. Final check. Did you enjoy the journey? Comment 3 if you love how it ended, or 4 if you'd like to see a sequel. Either way, thank you for sharing this experience with me. Below is a brief excerpt left intact as requested, for reference like contrast. It retains original names and structure. Please note we have changed names throughout the main rewritten story, so the following excerpt might not align with the new names. Just like that, I was out. No fanfare, no thank you. Heart bruised and pride barely intact. I sold the only apartment I had in the city and moved back to the countryside to live with my sister. I told myself I needed the peace, that maybe, just maybe, it was time to start living for myself. And there you have it, an unforgettable tale of reclaiming respect and setting firm boundaries. Sometimes family dynamics can be complicated, but dignity and self-worth should always come first. What did you think of our heroine's clever contract strategy? Would you have handled things differently? Let us know in the comments below. We can't wait to read your personal opinions and reactions. Also, don't forget to mention where you're listening from. It always brings us joy to connect with our global storytelling community. Remember, if you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you'll never miss our latest releases. Your support means everything to us here at Her Fireside Stories. Until next time, stay warm, stay inspired, and keep believing in your own strength and value. Goodbye for now.